kindred friends, and welcome to the Radical Emergence podcast, where we're having conversations at the edge of transformation. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Jen Pierre-Rich, and with me is my friend, co-host, and co-collaborator, Dr. Sally Adnams Jones. Please check out our bios in the show notes where you'll find links to our work, websites, and can find ways to connect with us. If you're not already following, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, and join our mailing list so you can stay up to date on new episodes as they drop.
Hello, everybody. Sally here. This exciting project consists of about 26 episodes in all, dedicated to better defining and understanding transformation on all its levels of reality. That's personal, social, as well as ecological. We're going to ask, what is transformation? Why bother? Why do we need it? And what does it feel like or look like? We'll also ask, can we induce it or perhaps accidentally block it? These are really important questions for growth.
We draw not only on our hard-won life experience, we are also transdisciplinarians. So what the heck is that? Well, it means we want to understand transformation from as many lenses as possible, including formal academic disciplines and discourses, art, media, and popular culture. Importantly, we draw from our living experience.
So we are experts, so to speak, but mostly in just one small but highly critical area, our own suffering, and the medicines that we've both used to transform our own lives. So to this end, we've also added decades of committed practices, as well as formal degrees, including specific in-depth studies in the mechanisms of transformation, because we needed to understand this healing journey for ourselves.
Does this entitle us to help others? You bet. Absolutely. Because it is by sharing our stories, knowledge, and direct experience that we offer sane, sober, practical tools for living on the ground of life. So welcome. Strap in, hang on, and enjoy the ride as we deep dive into a universe of transformation.
Everybody to our conversation on radical emergence. And if you've had the time to follow and track our conversation, this is episode 9. So we've had 8 previous hours to slowly unfold the questions we're looking at today, which is creativity. So creativity has been unfolding all the way along, but we started out with the nature of emergence, evolution. We looked at our creative identity, that we're a fractal of that creative emergence of the universe. And now we're looking much more specifically at the nature of creativity itself. Last week, episode 8, we unfolded the fact that creativity can go a long way to healing trauma. So that's a really important episode if you're interested in trying to understand how you can look at your backstory and work with that creatively in order to make space for new emergence to happen. So Bessel van der Kolk, who's a wonderful therapist, and you can Google him, says this: trauma is a failure of imagination. When your imagination dies, you are stuck with what you have. And opening the imagination is therefore critical to healing. So that's a beautiful quote. If you're interested in the nature of creativity for really processing the past, take a listen to last week's episode 8. So episode 9, we're moving forward with this notion of creativity. And next time we're going to do another one, the final one on creativity, because it's such a critical, important fractal of evolution, and it's within us. And how to work with that and maximize our potential is this week's episode. So I'm going to start off by suggesting that creativity cannot exist in a vacuum, that it's part of a field of interactions. We've already looked at our holonic nature in earlier episodes. And so we fully understand that we live in a field of transactions and relationships, an ecology of creativity. So in other words, to look at how we can become more creative, we need to look at what Ken Wilber calls the 4 quadrants. Or another way to name that in simpler language is bio, psycho, social, and political factors of creativity. So for example, you can be born with as much talent as you want. So that would be your DNA, perhaps, your bio. But without the psycho and social support and the political ability to express that, you won't be able to be creative. And that can actually lead to a lot of repression and depression if you can't express what your gift wants to be, what wants to emerge from your body. So understanding that creativity is in a field of relationships is what we're going to look at today. So let's just start off with understanding that this kind of rhizomatic intelligence that wants to move through us exists in our brain. Let's start with the bio, the body, the brain. And we can maximize creativity in certain ways by understanding how our brain works. First of all, that there's a right and left hemisphere that work together, that one is imaginal and intuitive, and one hemisphere is more executive function. It analyzes and problem solves. So even though this might feel reductive to say that creativity exists in both hemispheres and needs to work together, we're using this metaphorically because neither Jen nor I are neuroscientists. But let's just use this as a metaphor because someone like Ian McGilchrist, you can go and read his books, has done all the research on this. So I'm using his work to back up this. So to make an object, for example, a piece of art, a book, a play, a piece of music, you need to be, first of all, receptive and inhabit your right brain imagination and allow that to come forward. And then there's a process whereby you then slide into the left brain executive function in order to manifest and execute that idea. I know lots of people with lots of ideas who can't manifest. And I know lots of people who are really good with practical tools and ways to fix stuff, but with no imagination. So the first thing about the biological part of this equation is to understand we need both to be creative, or else partnership with someone who can fill in the gaps. Lots of partnerships, co-creations exist where one has imagination and the other does all the admin and execution. The other part of the brain I'd like to highlight is getting into the relaxed brainwaves, the theta brainwaves. If you want to maximize your creativity, we need to understand that if you're stressed out and in beta waves, you're not going to be able to access your imagination because the body prioritizes survival first. So being able to create some safety, being able to relax, get into parasympathetic nervous system. Maybe just before you go to sleep, that's when we go into theta naturally, or just as we wake up. Before we get into the busy beta waves, we can learn how to harvest our creativity. Those are the most imaginal brainwaves. So all sorts of solutions can come to us if we cultivate that state. So this is a couple of ways to understand the part of the biopsychosocial political field. Obviously also genes, if we're talking about bodies. Some bodies have wonderfully creative genes. Everybody is creative, small c, as they call it in creativity studies. Kids are all creative. But there is a hierarchy of talent. So you can all hope to access your creativity to a certain extent. And there are lines of intelligence that some people have that are just outstanding. So talent is real and it exists. So looking at all the biological factors for creativity, we then have to also understand in the psycho part of that, that there's personality. Not only do we have the ability to master our own instrument to become more creative and understand their genetic factors, we also have to understand that some personalities are more creative. And they've done a lot of research on this. So the more open you are, the more to experiences, the more receptive you are, the more independent you are in your thinking, the more agency and self-authoring you have, the more divergent your thinking is. In other words, looking at all the possibilities, not just one-word answers to every problem. It's rather, here's one problem with all the answers we could play with, as opposed to a math problem, which is convergent thinking. Here are the problems, but there's only one right answer. That's left brain. So practicing rhizomatic divergent thinking, having the courage to be seen and heard, because every time you make a creative product, you come out of the closet to a certain extent. So you're revealing something more authentic about yourself, and there's a risk in that. So it takes courage. So I'm going to hand it over to Jen now, and I'd love to hear more about her view on the biopsycho parts of creativity. And I know she's going to take this into her own answers because she's devoted to some practices that help with this. And then in the part 2, I'll come back and look at the social and political field of creativity. So over to you now, Jen.
That was great. I mean, we just couldn't be in better hands when we are delving into this really complex topic, and the way you explain it is so helpful for me, and I know anybody listening, to understand how these various aspects, these quadrants, are always influencing our relationship with creativity, or perhaps even getting in the way of our creative flow if we're not connecting on these various aspects of who we are and how we live. So I want to bring up a really important tool, one of my most favorite things in the world, and that is inquiry. And I've spoken about inquiry a lot on this show and how important it has been in my life. And specifically today, I want to talk about something called creative inquiry. So when I was in graduate school, I was fortunate to learn about creative inquiry from a man named Alfonso Montori, and he's a pioneer in the field of creative inquiry. He's a scholar and a researcher and an amazing saxophone player who's married to the jazz singer Kitty Margolis. Basically, creative inquiry is about integrating experience with knowledge and information, right? Rather than just getting a bird's eye view or a conceptual view of knowledge and information, we're integrating our own experience, our lived experience into knowledge and information. And it's not that a bird's eye view isn't important. It is. But that conceptual view, like Sally's pointing to, is just one way of knowing, and it's not really engaging the holistic view of our mind and imagination, right? So often we're taught, most of us through reproductive education, that we should engage with projects from a distance, from an intellectual distance, right? From a mental position that is often very reductive. And instead of really participating and playing dynamically with ideas. And there's a big difference between taking part in something and just thinking about it, right? There's a big difference between participating with something, with ideas and information or experiences, and just thinking about it. So in creative inquiry, this is what is known as integrating the inquirer into the inquiry. How am I situated within this field of inquiry, within this field of transformation, as Sally and I keep pointing to? How am I integrated within this, and how does that integration impact how I'm engaging with it, right? So creative inquiry means being an engaged consumer and creator of information. It's basically not just exploring a topic, but it's an evaluation of what we bring to a topic in terms of our direct experience, our assumptions, our worldviews, our biases, the knowledge that we have. How does that impact how we're engaging with information or an experience, right? So creative inquiry is a way of exploring information and solving problems and dealing with ordinary life experiences that fosters that imagination, right? That Sally was talking about. We're bringing the imagination back into the center, back into the forefront of how we are participating with the world, so that we can be more original and we can innovate and create and think outside of the box. But to do that, we have to be willing to explore our creative possibilities. And I want to say, just on the side of that, that we're living in a time of mass information, fast information, constantly changing. We're barraged with more information in a day than our forefathers could have ever imagined. So it's really essential to be a high quality consumer and creator of knowledge and information. So the other thing that creative inquiry does is it encourages a real sense of humility, right? Because you recognize how much you really don't know when you approach information and knowledge and experiences from this more dynamic place. And I want you to think about it not as just a way of dealing with knowledge, but you can apply this to any situation, to any topic in life, personal, social, ecological, on all the quadrants that Sally is leading us through. You can apply this creative inquiry to problem solving, to innovating, and to learning. It's better to look at anything from many different perspectives rather than just sticking to one perspective. And this is how we tap into new possibilities, new potentials, by embracing a spirit of curiosity and experimentation. In our last episode, we talked about that creativity takes courage, because it takes taking risks, right? It takes experimenting. It takes embracing failure and being open to new ideas. And unfortunately, we live in a society that really disapproves of failure and sees it as a personal failure. And that's really a shame, because that takes away from our creative energy, our creative force, when we're afraid to fail. We mentioned in the last episode that creativity means engaging with the mystery. All artists know this, that to be creative is to reach into the unknown, welcome it, celebrate wonder, and be willing to admit that we don't know everything. And it's from that fresh space of unknowing that we become creative inquirers. And there's a lot of examples, and I'm just about done, and I'm going to throw it back to Sally, but I want to quickly give some examples of creators who have done this that you're probably familiar with and maybe not have not thought about it in this way. So for example, Leonardo da Vinci was an artist and a scientist and inventor who explored many different fields of inquiry to create his most famous works. He explored civil engineering, chemistry, geology, geometry, hydrodynamics, mathematics, mechanical engineering, optics, physics, pyrotechnics, and zoology. I mean, that's incredible, right? So he was already being a creative inquirer to bring forth these amazing works that became masterpieces, right? Another person that you probably know is Albert Einstein, the famous physicist who was known for creative problem solving and integrating many different views into his work, like mathematics and theoretical physics. Another person you probably know about is Steve Jobs. He used creative inquiry. He was the founder of Apple, and he was able to approach technology and technological design in really innovative ways. And he incorporated engineering and video game design. And also he studied and incorporated Buddhism into his work. And there's that spiritual dimension, right? So what we're looking at is people who have integrated many views into their creative work. And finally, I want to give a shout out to our beloved Maya Angelou, who was definitely a creative inquirer. She was a poet and a memoirist and a singer and a dancer and civil rights activist who drew from many different disciplines to create her work. And what I think is so interesting about each of these people is that they continue long after they're gone to inspire us to think creatively and push the boundaries of our own thinking and experience. And to me, that is what being a creative inquirer is all about. So I'm going to pass it back to you, Sally, and let's go deeper into the unknown together.
Thanks, Jen. I so respect and admire the beautiful people that you mentioned, and it warms my heart. They've always been kind of heroes to me, exactly the people that you mentioned. Einstein, Da Vinci, Angelou, Jobs, because to me they exemplify people who've dug deep to really bring forth their gifts. So emerging from them has come this stream of novelty, which is kind of a way that evolution works through us. So we've looked at individuals, their interiors, beautiful people who dug deep into their interior to express something. This relentless movement into novelty, as Whitehead calls it, comes through the human body, through individuals. Biologically and psychologically, we can try to maximize that potential when we understand it. But now I'm going to look at cultures as well, because not only do certain individuals stand out as creative, cultures do too, certain cultures and certain epochs in history. And there's reasons for that. They've looked at the fact that there's certain contexts that allow for individual flourishment of creatives. So what are those? The social and political perspectives on this phenomenon that we're studying, creativity. So it has interior aspects, bio and psycho, and it has exterior aspects, social and political. So let's take a look at those two now. You can imagine some little kid at home who has a lot of genetic potential and really has the personality that wants to play and explore and be curious, but that is not supported in the home. Sometimes, you know, particularly if a little girl shows a lot of creative yang energy, she just wants to build and make stuff, that's not encouraged because that might be too masculine. Or a little boy who wants to dress up and perform and stand on a stage or play a musical instrument, that might be discouraged because it's feminine. So we've looked at that already. So that's one of the aspects of support. Can the creative live in a community, a family to start with, that allows them to be who they are and express all their parts? So it's social and cultural support that's needed for creativity to come through the individual. At school, the school itself has to support the arts and not just the STEM subjects, the science, technology, engineering, and math. So if the school values the imaginal and the aesthetic and the expressive, then those biological and psychological aspects can flourish. If not, they get repressed. Then there's the workplace. We know that careers that analyze or fix stuff, the left brain, get rewarded financially, much more than creative jobs. Doctors and lawyers are paid way more than graphic artists. So all the way through our lives, even if we have all the genes and all the talent and all the personality and dedication and hard work that creativity requires, the 10,000 hours of mastery of the skill, whatever that is, the years of dedication to perfect your art, we can still experience these discouraging social and political aspects. So that's just the cultural part of the family, the school, and the workplace that could repress creativity. What about the politics? So that, the politics have a large part to play, for example, in how female genius has been silenced. So we're coming out of millennia of political, patriarchal, and religious beliefs that have shut down female creativity in particular. So we've closed off our voices. We haven't been able to earn a living at all from being a writer or a painter. And yet men were encouraged to go do the thing. And they even had guilds that supported men and taught them how to be masters, and masculine genius was celebrated. So that's another aspect of our history, but we're emerging from that. Feminine genius can now be recognized. It's always been there. But sadly, it was felt it wasn't there because nobody understood the political pressure to silence that genius that many, many women have. So we're coming out of that, thank goodness, that period of repression and the political aspect that has repressed creativity, particularly in women, for so long. So there have been periods in our history too when creativity has burgeoned. And people have looked at that, like, for example, the Greeks in the 5th century before Christ, when all the beautiful buildings and the sculptures were made. Or in the Renaissance in Italy, particularly in Florence, there was a burgeoning of creativity. In the 1900s in Paris, on the left bank of the Seine, where all the artists gathered from all over the world, they went to paint and write and drink absinthe and celebrate together. There was a burgeoning of creativity. Beautiful novels were written and philosophies were created and exhibitions were held. So people have studied that the social support was there for artists in certain periods. So safety, when there's a lot of war going on, we're problem solving, we're not creating. Our energy immediately goes to fight and flight and survival, and the imaginal has to shut down to keep the body safe. The culture has to support the values of the artists. They have to have the audiences that come and support the objects that are made, the plays, the operas, the exhibitions. So if the culture itself values what the artist is doing, it will be supported. If there's patronage, for example, in the Renaissance with the Catholic Church, supported artists, huge male artists, hugely by paying them to create beautiful works of art that the church owned. Kings and queens have been great patrons of great artists. So the question might be, what do we need now for a collective flowering of our creativity? One of the things might be a universal basic wage to liberate our attention enough from survival in order to put it into something creative. So that's always our dilemma, is harnessing our focus from survival needs, allowing ourselves to relax and have some leisure time to play and experiment and be creative and do research that leads to beautiful objects being made. So safety, harnessing attention, support from the community, valuing what we do instead of devaluing it, keep saying it's childish, it's a waste of your time, go be a doctor. You know, it's the whole community has to support and recognize creativity for us to really move forward and build this new world that we're all talking about. So we've looked at the biological, the psychological, which are the interior of creativity, and the social and cultural and political, which is the exterior support and context. And with all those four quadrants, creativity as a phenomenon can emerge. And I look forward to the time when we can do that as a culture. I'm going to throw it back to you now, dear Jen, and see what you have to say.
Yes, it's so important, this lens that you're bringing forth, that if we don't have that cultural and political support to bring forth our creative potential, that we're really stifled. And I love to see, I think we are having our own creative renaissance now. In a lot of ways, you see people using technology, especially, to bring forth their creative gifts that they would have never been able to share on such a broad scale at any other time in history. Just like this podcast that we're doing is a creative product of our love and knowledge, and we wouldn't have been able to do that had the technology not existed, right? And so we're just I think we're in the beginning of something that's happening. I feel it on many levels in our world, and I'm really excited to be part of that with you, and that this podcast is just a tiny slice of what is budding right now for our collective creative potential. So transformation, creative transformation especially, often starts with an inquiry, an inner inquiry, asking ourselves hard questions, digging deep to figure out what is going on, and also facing our discomfort and our fears. But transformation goes beyond just introspection, right? The power of participation is needed as well. We need introspection and participation. We have to participate with creative transformation in order to change. And in our podcast, we want to transform consciously, right? That's one of the things that we keep bringing forward, is how do we participate within this field of transformation consciously, so that we're moving with transformation rather than against it. And our goal is to explore beyond our current boundaries, because when we do this, when we're able to break free from those old patterns, those old questions, those old assumptions, and discover new things, we get fresh insight and new perspectives, right? So creative inquiry is about challenging us to think differently and embrace transformation. We could find, when we do that, solutions to problems that we thought could never be solved. In all of those quadrants Sally was talking about, the solutions to the problems in all of those quadrants exist in creative answers, creative solutions. And we might realize that we have biases and beliefs and behaviors that are holding us back. Right? And so when we recognize those patterns, that leads us to real effective change. So transformation and creative inquiry are working together in tandem to help us grow, both as individuals and within our sociocultural, political, ecological realm. Transformation and creativity helps us form connections rather than focusing so much on our disconnections. They push us to embrace change, disrupt old patterns, and pursue new opportunities. Transformation and creative inquiry encourage us to look beyond our limitations and open us to new possibilities. So let's go deeper really quickly about why it's important to use creative inquiry to explore new possibilities and solve problems and go deeper into situations in everyday life. So in a 2015 article of frequently asked questions about creative inquiry, Dr. Alfonso Montori points the way. He says that it helps us understand the entire universe is not a giant machine. And that's the modernist mindset, right? That everything can be reduced, that we're in a very mechanical world. But rather, creative inquiry embraces the idea that the entire universe, as Sally was saying, is a creative process that has been happening throughout the history of the universe. And this is what Christian mystics have called creatio continua. And that's the impulse of the creative transformation in the universe. This is what Sally and I have been pointing to time and time again, that we are fields of transformation operating within a larger field of transformation. That's that halonically nested orientation, right? So Dr. Montori says that being creative inquirers helps us make meaningful and creative contributions to the world. It helps us get in touch with how we create meaning, which is very important in this time of a meaning crisis. Creative inquiry helps us understand our motivations and especially our passions. It helps us unlearn those limiting beliefs and invite change into our lives in the pursuit of development on all those quadrants that Sally is pointing us to. It invites us into the art of unknowing as much as knowing. It's a way of creating a creativity mindset in our everyday life through self-reflection and through inquiry. In a 2008 article, also by Dr. Montori, and it's called The Joy of Inquiry. And this is a quote from him, and it's a little long, but sit with me for this. So Dr. Montori says, "Inquiry for me was inspired by, but also a producer of wonder at the spectacular differences among people, the mysteries of human behavior and emotion, as well as nature, the unexplained and half forgotten, the repressed, denied, and misunderstood. The more you inquire, the more the world is a source of wonder." This is sometimes expressed as the deeper you look, the less you know, in the sense that every new advance by science probably exposes more new unknowns. But to me, this is a glass half full perspective, because the not knowing, the ultimately unfathomable nature of the universe, is precisely the source of the wonder. The opposite of wonder for me is an attitude that has stopped inquiring, stopped going further for whatever reason. It could be the fear of the unknown, simple habituation, or just wanting to be right, and therefore not being open to anything new or different or unexpected, something that I may not be right about. And he says this is the trap of knowing, of believing we know ourselves, our friends, our spouses, how the world really is, and becoming closed to novelty and change. It's the trap of seeing knowledge above all as having a position that has to be defended against the opposition. This is the metaphor of knowledge as a war, knowledge as building the protective edifice of the ego. So that's a mouthful, but I think that what Dr. Montori is pointing us to is that it is in the unknowing that we find the wonder and we find creative transformation. And that is what we are really trying to impress upon you all who are listening, is to welcome the unknown and perhaps experience the world in new ways, in ways that you hadn't thought about before. Okay, Sally, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Yeah, Jen, this is just such an important section now to go a little deeper into that question of creativity. And you mentioned the word consciousness. So I think I'm going to bring those two together, because we can be deeply creative without any ethics, without a level of consciousness. So that also needs to be looked at, I feel. So I don't want to romanticize creativity as just all sweetness and light and wonder, because it can be badly abused without a level of consciousness. And I want to thank you for bringing that in, because I want to just expand on that. So let's give an example. During World War II, the Nazis would spend the day gassing people in chambers and sit through the most elegant, wonderful operas by night. They would find out which Jews had the most beautiful art collections, and they would arrest them, send them to the gas chambers, and heist their art for their own love of beauty. That was the biggest art heist in history. And that's still being resolved today. That art is being returned slowly to the Jewish families that owned it. So let's just take a look at that. This is a nation that went through a period in our past of having a deep aesthetic and a love of beauty. And yet their consciousness was lagging in ethics at the time. So being deeply creative doesn't naturally come with an ethic. Let's put it that way. The Americans created the atomic bomb. We all create stuff, and there's a lag until our ethics catch up with it. And we develop some rules of engagement with that powerful thing we created. And we're looking at that right now with AI. We have to be really careful with our creativity, because it is powerful, and it doesn't come hand in hand with a set of ethics. That has to be developed separately. In fact, our creativity can run away with us, and we can be extremely evil with it. So just noticing that consciousness has to catch up with our creativity. And this is what Rollo May, who wrote books on creativity, is really worth looking at. Rollo May, he says this: consciousness, receptivity, absorption, integration, and ecstasy, and encounters that bring some new reality into being are posited as a potential nexus for transformation. So that's a possibility that exists, and we have to live up to that possibility with our consciousness. Otherwise, it can go sideways pretty fast. So just being aware that it's not all sweetness and light to be deeply creative. In fact, people really suffer because of their sensitivity. The more creative you are, generally speaking, the more you experience pain and sadness, because you happen to have that biopsycho propensity for awareness that also has to be managed. I want to now just end off by saying, even though we have the ability as humans to be creative and dangerous with it, some people would posit that it's our sacred gift. So this is the other side of the spectrum. We've looked at the bio, psycho, social, and political. Now I just want to end with saying there's also the sacred. So someone like our dear friend Ken Wilber says, this extraordinary cosmos is a creative fountain. The creative advance into novelty is spirit in action. Now, you don't have to be a theist to believe that. Spirit in action could be seen as evolution that is kind of an intelligent energy that's located in our body and brain, and that we have a responsibility to potentiate that, to bring our source into visibility. You don't have to be a particular religion. You don't even have to be a theist. You can be a panentheist. You can just believe that evolution itself is creative and generative, and that we can touch into that. So there's a whole spectrum of perspectives we can take on this phenomenology that we call creativity. And as Jen beautifully said, it's participatory. So you can read as many books as you want about it. You can look at all the 4 perspectives, as Jen and I just did, and you can add in the 5th, the sacred. But it goes nowhere without your physical engagement with your brain and your body and your DNA and your openness and curiosity and your passion. So that's why we've devoted 3 episodes to this topic, because once you engage, you will be transformed. So I'd like to say goodbye for this session, and I'm going to let Jen say goodbye to you all too, and end off with a couple of inquiry questions.
Yes, that the ethical view is essential. And we have been really mindful as we've been crafting this podcast about including, in fact, we have a whole show about transformation and ethics, because it is so important. And it can be really taken down a horrible field that is harmful to people without that conscious awareness. And so you're right. We want to celebrate the wonder of creativity, but also honor all sides, the shadow side of creativity as well, and be aware of it and bring it to the forefront. So one of the best ways that we can engage with creative transformation and creative inquiry in our daily life is by asking what are called I wonder questions. So I'm going to end the show today by asking you a series of questions. And also I invite you to come up with your own I wonder questions that will help you develop the skill of creative inquiry. Because questions are really important, a really important skill. A lot of people overlook the power and potential of asking questions, but I want to bring that back to the forefront of your mind and heart tonight. So I'll ask you these questions. If I forget a thought, where does it go? Can anything really be objectively experienced? Where do dreams come from? How do I define freedom? What makes me, me? Who am I? And why am I here? What is the point of existence? What do I know? What do I think I know? What don't I know? And what do I want to know? And with that, We would like to thank you for joining us on this episode of Radical Emergence podcast. And we look forward to seeing you next time on our next episode, which will again be about creativity. And it will be episode 10. We're moving right along on this amazing project. And I'm just so thrilled to spend this time with you, Sally, and with everyone listening. We wish you a good week, and we will catch you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
So thanks for joining us. And we hope you can take away some helpful tools, perhaps some great stories, and some wisdom for your own ongoing journey.
Join us for our next episode, where we will deep dive again into a universe of transformation.